ahead and call the meeting to order. We do have a few people that weren't able to make it today, but they did check in with me and they're excused. The only item on the agenda today is a hearing on HB 2526, Home Inspectors Bill. And I think we'll go ahead and start by having the reviser explain what the bill does. Charles Reimer.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. House Bill 2526 sets up a registration regulation program for home inspectors. It's administered and enforced by the Attorney General. It is a bill that has been here before. So I'll just quickly go through the sections of the bill. The first section is the definitions section. Section 3 basically just states that registration is required. There's a provision for a civil penalty if you act in the capacity of a home inspector without being properly registered. Section 4 establishes the Home Inspectors Advisory Council. The purpose of that body is to assist and advise the Attorney General on matters related to industry standards, education, testing requirements of applicants, and also rules and regulations. The members of the Advisory Council are set out on page 3 of the bill, so you can take a look at that. They are appointed by the Attorney General, and they serve 2-year terms. And they are primarily made up of individuals who have experience in the field of home inspection. The Attorney General has certain duties and powers under the Act. Those are set out in Section 5. One of those is to register qualified applicants. Another, perhaps important duty is to establish an online system for individuals, for the public, to check and see if a home inspector is registered. The Attorney General conducts all investigations into the qualifications of registrants and also into allegations of misconduct against an applicant or a registrant. And the Attorney General sets standards and approves examinations, and also establishes reciprocity guidelines. And rule and reg authority is granted to the Attorney General on page 4. Applications are discussed in Section 6. There are requirements that an applicant answer under oath whether they have ever been convicted of a felony offense or have ever applied for or held a home inspector's registration under a different name, or whether their registration has ever been suspended or revoked. The Attorney General has the authority to conduct a criminal history records check or background check on applicants and registered home inspectors. Section 7 pertains to powers of the Attorney General with respect to the denial, suspension, or revocation of a registration. And there are a number of provisions laid out on page 5 of the bill that are the basis for a denial, suspension, or revocation on page 5 and also page 6. Section 8 provides for fees that may be set by the Attorney General. There are limitations on the fees That's at the bottom of page 6. Page 7 pertains to enforcement of the Act by the Attorney General. The Attorney General can pursue an action for an injunction to enforce compliance. And also the Attorney General may hire independent counsel. Section 10 on page 7 provides a fund, the Home Inspector's Registration Fee Fund, for the purposes of the Act. Section 11 and 12 are the requirements for registration. So first, under Section 11, the requirements are set out there. The second bottom half of page 7, you have to be at least 18 years of age, have general liability insurance coverage of at least $250,000, and maintain proof of financial responsibility by securing one of the following requirements. And there are a number of them. One is a policy of errors and omissions insurance coverage. That's at the bottom of page 7. Another option is an irrevocable letter of credit at the top of page 8 there. Proof of the maintenance of a minimum balance of $10,000 in an escrow account is a third option. Section 12 pertains to requirements for applicants who have been previously licensed or are practicing, and also new applicants. Applicants who were previously licensed under old law just have to show that they have been engaged in home inspections for at least 2 of the previous 3 years. Applicants who have been actively and continually engaged in the practice of conducting home inspections are also do not have to meet the education requirements if they've been practicing for not less than 2 years prior to the license application date and have completed at least 200 home inspections. Applicants without experience or prior who have been previously registered must meet both education and some training requirements. At the bottom of page 8, they need to successfully complete either an online course of 120 hours of education. They also have to submit evidence of an approved course of study of not less than 40 hours of classroom instruction. That's at the top of page 9. That education is to be approved by the Attorney General, those requirements. There's a requirement that individuals keep documents at the bottom of page 9. Home inspectors must keep a record of the home inspection agreement and the home inspection report. The Attorney General has authority to set requirements for reactivating a registrant or a home inspector whose registration has become inactive at the top of page 10, and also for reinstatement. Section 13 is one that may be of note because it lays out all the exemptions to the Act. Subsection C, line 24 on page 10, exempts architects. Line 26 and 27 exempts professional engineers. And there are a number of other exemptions that you can see there on page 10 and 11. Section 14 provides that violation of the Act is a Class C misdemeanor. Section 15 pertains to architects and engineers, specifically providing that they may register as a home inspector, but they're not required to meet the educational and training requirements of sections 11 and 12 for registration. It also provides that complaints against a licensed architect or engineer are to be referred to the Kansas Board of Technical Professions. Section 16 provides a duty of care for home inspectors and some other requirements. Home inspectors are to perform their home inspection in accordance with some listed standards at the top of page 12. Those include national standards by the American Society of Home Inspectors, International Association of Certified Home Inspectors, National Academy of Building Inspection Engineers, or any other recognized standard approved by the Attorney General after consultation with the Advisory Council. There's a limitation of damages in this act for home inspectors to $2,000 in the aggregate. If there's going to be liability to the home inspector for more than that, that liability increase must be specifically provided, set out in the agreement with the homeowner. There's a statute of limitations in the middle of page 12. An action to recover damages must, for a home inspector, as a result of a home inspection, has to be brought within 12 months from the date of the home inspection. Section 17 provides that an individual may not present themselves as a home inspector unless they're registered. There's a sunset provision in this act on page 13. It expires on July 1st, 2028. If enacted, it would become effective on July 1st of this year. That's what the bill does.
Thanks, Charles. Any questions for the reviser? Representative Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, there's a lot to unpack here, Charles, but I think the first question that comes to my mind is, where did this come from?
Charles, go ahead.
Well, here's my initial thought upon reading this is that we're creating a massive barrier to entry into the industry. Did this come from home inspectors themselves who are protecting themselves from competition?
I think I'll let the conferees answer that, but just, in the course of working on this, I am aware that this has been through considerable discussion, none of which I am privy to, so.
Okay, very good.
Representative Curtis and then Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So have we seen this legislation or something similar to this before?
Yes, this bill, I'm trying to recall if it was maybe last year, but recently it was before the committee.
Do you have any idea what bill number or anything so that I can look back?
Yeah, I can get that for you. I don't have that right offhand.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And similar to some of the previous questions, I was just curious, there was a few more crude pages weighable than I expected, and I wondered, is there something where we maybe got it from another type of entity or another state that we were, or is this a lot of fresh work that we have done?
Representative, I just don't recall, where the original bill, whether that came from another state. I know originally it was originally as it was, I think, considered as a licensing provision, and then it was changed to a registration scheme. But I think the conferees would probably be able to answer that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, for the record, this bill was requested by the Realtors Association, and I bet they could speak to where it came from when they're up here. Representative Dodson, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I didn't know exactly when to ask this or who to ask it to, but when we look at architects, engineers, electricians, plumbers, there are boards at the state level. Is this set up in the same way that when you expect a professional engineer or architect, or is this something else? In other words, the Attorney General is mentioned in here several times.
Representative, so I think this would differ in the sense that it's not a licensing provision. It's just a registration provision. There are educational requirements, there are training requirements, and folks with experience can sort of be grandfathered in. But it differs in the sense that, in that sense.
Thank you.
Along the same line of questioning with that, on the, why the Attorney General? Does the Attorney General do anything else like this? Eddie, you nodded your head maybe? No? Oh, okay. He just dozed off, no biggie.
Chairman, just in general, I would say, you might say this falls under the general category of consumer protection. So,
Eddie, did you want to?
The Attorney General's office does have a roofing contractors registry housed within it. That's probably the most comparable thing.
I think Representative Sutton's familiar with that. He voted for that, by the way. Representative Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for reminding me of that. One of the very few votes I wish I could have back, and I can assure you I won't make that mistake again.
Any further questions for the reviser? All right, seeing none, thank you, Charles. Appreciate it. And by the way, Charles, thank you for all your work on the Apex bill. You guys were buried and inundated, and there were a lot of things said about that bill that were criticisms, but they were not criticisms aimed at you, that's for sure. You guys really worked hard, and we appreciate all the work you did. With that, we'll open the proponent section of the bill, and there is one proponent, and that's Mark Toom, Government Affairs for the Realtor Association.
Chairman Tarwater, members of the House Commerce Committee, my name is Mark Toom. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony today in support of House Bill 2526 on behalf of the Kansas Association of Realtors. In recent years, realtors have taken the lead role in working with stakeholders, including inspector associations, to advance a home inspector bill, and this is a top legislative priority of my association. We believe it's extremely important to provide consumer protections for what is generally someone's largest purchase. The person performing these services should be competent, and like any professional, there really should be consequences for not performing their duties. This bill would provide for a minimum standard for education and liability protections and join 39 other states that have home inspector standards. And we are here largely because Kansas previously had professional standards for this profession that was unfortunately allowed to sunset in 2013 despite legislation to renew it that passed the Senate 36-3 and 102-17, but was vetoed and no attempt was made to override it at that time. This legislation includes some of that similar type of language. It does go to the Attorney General's office, and similar to what the roofing registry does. So there's language that's included there, but also from other states. Realtors believe that this legislation takes a strong step forward and protects consumers from receiving home inspection services from unqualified individuals, and Kansans agree. We, with the help of our National Association of Realtors, commissioned a poll, and 87% of registered voters in Kansas support requiring people to register as home inspectors. That poll also shows that many people already assumed that people were registered or that there was an occupational license in this area. That poll also showed that 72% believe that there should be liability consequences for somebody that's committing essentially a fraudulent home inspection. This legislation is a compromise amongst several groups, and really the goal here is to protect consumers while at the same time not harming the home inspection industry. Stakeholder discussions have been occurring the last 2 or 3 years. It's really been on the Senate side, this bill. This is the first time that the House has seen it, and we had legislation last year. I believe it's Senate Bill 176. But stakeholder discussions have been made to improve the legislation throughout this recent years, and those discussions have included representatives from the Kansas Association of Real Estate Inspectors, Kansas Association of Residential and Commercial Inspectors, International Association of Certified Home Inspectors, the Kansas Society of Professional Engineers, and the American Institute of Architects. While not every member of those associations are going to support every aspect of this legislation, I think that it is a true compromise and that recognizes the need to provide meaningful protection for consumers. With no standards in state law, anyone can call themselves a home inspector, and they can limit the liability of that inspection to the cost of that inspection. So somebody who's missing something like mold or serious structural issues to a property are really the only recourse is the cost of that inspection, which in most cases is just several $100s. So in conclusion, the Kansas Association of Realtors would urge members of the House Commerce Committee to support this legislation and bring standards for the home inspection industry while providing significant protections for consumers. And I'd be happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Committee, any questions? Representative Ralph.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe just a couple. And in full disclosure, I haven't read through all this. I'm mainly going from the reviser's review of this at that point. But based upon the extensive nature of that, I'll start off with a piece. I'm a skeptic. This sounds, and I think I would agree with the representative, like a pretty large barrier in between. So a couple of questions. First off, you said that this was a compromise. Tell me what do you mean?
We worked with the major home inspectors associations in a committee formed essentially to write this legislation and look what we can do to protect the consumer.
And all of those folks who were at that table support this legislation?
I think they have varying levels of support. I think there's some people who want maybe educational requirements that match their associations, and we wanted essentially a floor. So we did make some decisions that maybe one of the associations maybe doesn't necessarily agree, but they agree with the concept of a registry.
So maybe a more accurate representation is you had a conversation with all of these folks, but you don't have anyone that's signing off on this particular legislation with full-throated.
I think there is written testimony and support from one of those associations. I think that the quickness of this hearing probably prevented some more of that kind of testimony as well.
I just wanted to make sure that we were clear about when you said there is a compromise. There, in fact, is not a compromise. You have some folks that are supportive of some pieces of this legislation, but you don't have a compromise that this legislation is supported by all those folks who were present at that table. Would that be fair?
Their leadership has been has agreed to this legislation. They may have parts of it they wish to change, but they agree in principle.
If I might, in one other spot, I'm curious as to, and I'm sure there are many anecdotal references or instances of bad circumstances and situations where homeowners have been put in a bad spot because of unscrupulous inspectors or just plain old negligence and the like. I'm curious as to, would the realtors not say that those folks generally are cleared out or cleaned out pretty quickly? Because at least my experience has been is that realtors are in some fashion involved with the retention of home inspectors, or they ask someone to be involved or whatever. I would think that if a couple of bad spots that those folks get cleared out by not being asked back into transactions. Is that not really the case?
I think there's some of that certainly occurs. I think a common practice is a realtor will provide a list of inspectors, but that potential homeowner is still on their own to find an inspector, and if they're maybe shopping based on cost and not experience, or they probably assume that everyone has, that it's a qualified inspector, they may land on somebody that's not. But they make the choice.
I would assume, though, if they're relying on someone, they're probably relying on that list. And would it be fair to say that realtors aren't putting bad home inspectors back on their list?
I think that there's a bad experience, that could be the case, absolutely.
That would be the
I would
case,
think so.
wouldn't it? Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's all I've got.
Representative Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I know clearly a lot of work has been done on this, and our realtors often bring a lot of key things to our consideration, but just trying to get my head wrapped around the extensiveness of the bill. And I can kind of understand your testimony, which is helpful to say, oh, there are some things that I might want to do, but it feels like there's a lot more in the bill than what is there. And I wonder, one of the things, the first point that kind of rang true, something sunsetted in 2013. Does this look like what sunsetted in 2013? Is there more to this? Or what might it look like if we went back to something like what that was?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it builds off of the experience because there was an advisory panel entity. I know that there was some concerns of maybe how some of that was run, so I think there's some corrections to that. So it certainly builds off of that experience, but it is certainly not identical.
So thank you. So it was an advisory panel that we had that sunset in 2013? Is that
There
what
was a home inspection board.
Okay, and then building off what we might want to add to that. So,
Yep.
so thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mark, I noticed in the bill, it asked whether or not there's a felony offense.
Yep.
Would a felony offense rule an individual out under this bill? If an individual has a felony offense, would it rule them out?
Yes.
It would
That's
rule them
part of it. I think that the belief was that if somebody's going to be having access to somebody's home, that seemed to be a reasonable protection. That is also a requirement for a real estate licensee.
120 hours of instruction and 20 supervised inspections seems like quite a bit for an individual that might otherwise have a lot of experience with this kind of thing. Where did that number come from? Why 120 and why 20 inspections?
I think that was from the home inspection associations themselves that had recommended that number, and we included that in the bill.
So how would that work? Would an individual have to then work for an inspection company and be supervised, or would you have to pay 2 inspectors to come out?
No, that would be an apprentice type of a relationship. So probably be working for the home inspection company to get that experience.
Does this bill rule out any non-compete clauses if an individual needs to work for a company to get the experience?
I don't think it addresses that at all.
What is the main concern? The fact that if an inspector misses something, that they're limited only to the monies that was paid to them? Is that if there's gross negligence, they can't be sued at all?
I think they usually you sign a contract that they limit the liability for anything to the cost of the inspection. So it would complicate that. I'm sure that an attorney would still probably take that case, but it certainly complicates it.
I can see requiring somebody to have a bond or an insurance policy of $10,000 and just in case, but it seems like this would make it very difficult for an individual to start their own business and get into business. And it almost eliminates that. How would you tell somebody, say, that had been building things their whole life that then decides, I'm going to go into my own business and I want to be a home inspector because I enjoy that. What's to stop? How would you advise that person?
To how they get into the industry, or?
Right.
I mean, obviously, you're going to, it's in a kind of an apprenticeship, so you're going to learn from somebody who's doing it. So I think that's generally how you would enter the industry, even if you have maybe experience in other aspects of it, but you're still going to need to kind of have that apprentice type of a relationship.
Okay, so with the $10,000 limit that you have in here, and errors and omission, is guilt automatically implied if an inspector, say, doesn't catch, are they given some sort of a warranty in, like, if a pipe bursts a month into it that they weren't aware of, does that fall back on the inspector at that point?
I think, it's going to have to be a glaring omission, I think, for that to probably kick in. And my understanding is that those amounts are what is usually a member, part of a membership of those different associations. They provide some of that liability type of protection, so it's generally not something, but it is available on the open market, so I don't think it's not a cost prohibitive feature.
Okay. I guess my last line of questioning anyway, would be, we talk a lot about workforce development in here and how it's hard to hire people. What's the inspector market like? Is it difficult to find inspectors? Are there a lot of them? Like if you sell a house and you need it to be inspected in a week, is it difficult to find somebody that can do that?
I think there's availability in most areas. I think certainly in some of the western and more rural areas that might have somebody coming from maybe a little bit further away, but I think there is certainly a viable home inspection industry in Kansas.
And by adding this to making this law, would that severely hamper the number of inspectors that would be able to continue, or?
I don't think so. I think it would professionalize. I think that you're going to also have people that are now going to have to demonstrate competency, so the consumer is ultimately served.
Representative Dodson.
I just wanted to ask about applicability here. For example, in the city of Manhattan, we have international building codes and national building codes, which are incorporated into the city building codes and reviewed every 2 years in front of the council. Every new building is inspected by a code officer. Every addition or change over a certain dollar amount is inspected by that code office. So is the applicability here limited to the transfer of properties between persons, not included in industrial property and so on? Is this dwellings?
This is going to be, it is home inspections, so it's intended to just be the residential market. So it then is separate, certainly from code enforcement at a city level. It is a service that's provided, essentially to facilitate the transaction of a home sale.
Okay, thanks.
Representative Croft.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for your testimony today. Real quick, since this is about homes, and as was mentioned earlier about most of us get our list of inspectors from our realtor. You and I have talked about this before. Was there any discussion with the other inspecting organizations to simply establish a ranking level, a certification level that you guys could use rather than trying to go through this whole process of creating more of this?
We haven't had in-depth discussions about that, no. I mean, I remember our discussion about it and have floated it as a possibility of, some sort of is there like a good housekeeping seal of approval or something like that? It's a little outside of maybe our lane as an association of realtors, but that might be something to have to be investigated further.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Long.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It looks like the provisions of this bill are set to expire in 6 years. Mark, is that designed that way to relook at it to see if it's working, or what was the thought process there? Do you know?
Yeah, there were certainly some of the inspector associations that didn't want to have another sunset because they didn't want it to go away like it did last time. But I also think it's good to, revisit legislation and see if there's, ways to make it better, or if there's something that's not quite working, then it will, force it to be opened up in a period of time. So that's why we've included the sunset.
And one more question, Mr. Chairman. With the advent of this bill, Mark, do you anticipate the cost of inspections going up as a result of this legislation?
I would not think significantly at all. It's largely going to probably eliminate some people in the industry who are maybe not competent, but I don't think that it will fundamentally change, since the liability protections, if they're a professional, they're already doing that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. All right. Aside from any philosophic differences, I'm just going through the pages of the bill, and this is kind of my first go around through this particular one. One of the things that struck me on page 9, when we talk about the training, the continuing education requirements, it looks like these should be approved by a few different organizations: American Society of Home Inspectors, International Code Council, so on and so forth. It strikes me as odd that the first thing that we would do in establishing a board would be to outsource the training materials to, which would actually be a legislative effect, the requirement for training, to an individual organization. What was the thought process behind that?
Those are currently associations that are doing this type of training, so it's to make it to satisfy that state requirement. We did put in there that it could be, or a recognized home inspector education or training program approved by the Attorney General, so there certainly opens the door if they want to get in the training business. But if it's already being done by these associations, it didn't seem like that's something that the Attorney General's office needed to be involved in, except maybe proving it.
Right. The issue that arises on this, though, is legislatively requiring someone to take a course offered by a private organization. It gets a little fuzzy in there, and it causes some concern as to why those organizations are picked specifically, and what the effect of this legislation might be on their enrollment.
Yeah, that type of a relationship exists already. I think you can point to, there are several providers of real estate continuing education, for-profit companies and associations like mine that do training. So I don't think that doesn't seem to be a concern.
Right, and I understand that they're offering these courses currently. The issue, as we've come upon maybe in some other areas too, is the mandate.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So, Mark, it's been mentioned that this bill's been around and it has gone through the Senate a few times. Mm-hmm. What were some of the issues? Why did it not get out of the Senate Commerce Committee, and did you address any of that in this new bill?
Well, I have been on board in my current position since the 2020 session. So I started in December of 19, and then that was the pandemic shortened session where you passed, I think, 10 or 11 bills. So it kind of died. And then the next year, I think there was a prioritization, and certainly both commerce committees were dealing a lot with unemployment insurance, and I think that was a good focus on your all's part. There just wasn't a lot of, I think, bandwidth for this issue. We had a hearing in the Senate last year, but it just didn't rise above the priority line.
Okay, seeing no further questions, appreciate your testimony today. There are two other proponents on this bill, and they are both written, and if they haven't been emailed to you, they will be, and they're also on the S drive. We'll close the proponent testimony at this time unless there's someone else here that wants to speak to the bill as a proponent. Okay, seeing none. We do have an individual down as neutral, but it's been brought to my attention that that individual is an opponent at this point. And so we'll move them into the opponent section. But we'll start with Patrick Butler from Tallgrass Home Inspectors as an opponent. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Honorable Chair Tarwater, members of the committee, good afternoon, and audience here. I'll just go ahead and read my statement, and then I can take any questions from there. My name is Pat Butler. I'm a 52-year-old United States Army combat veteran, served 2 campaigns, both in Desert Shield and Iraqi Freedom. I am a certified home inspector with trained under 6 recognized professional organizations. I hold over 30 certifications. I stand on 3 separate committees, one being our local Habitat for Humanities, along with both state and international inspector professional organizations. Excuse me, got a little warm in here. I'll just cut.
That's okay. Just take your time.
Thank you.
You can take your jacket off too if you'd like.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Thank you. I'll start. It says, I honestly believe that all parties, and both proponents and opposition of this bill, sincerely want the same thing. And that is for the Kansas residents to be represented by competent professional inspectors who will exercise their fiduciary duties and their responsibilities in their best interest. While I wholeheartedly hold this to be true, it is my belief that this bill in its current form falls short of these charges. For this reason, I cannot support this bill at this time in its current form. Within this legislation, there are several numbers of discrepancies that do not provide protections to the client to create an unfair marketplace for these places one professional organization over another. With 2 of those clearly visible in these discrepancies, and I'll mention them both for the sake of time. One, the exception of the limits of liabilities creates a false sense of security to the public at large. The second is the allowable of third-party vendors by one association and prohibited by another. These conditions will handicap the inspectors across the state for the sake of this legislation in itself, and also impose the will of one institution above another. And the limits of the liability in the services at large. While these items may appear small in line item indifference on paper, the impact of the Home Inspection inspection profession, will be great. I hope and pray that this committee takes my words into consideration and reject this bill in its current form. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for the conferee? Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I didn't catch your geographic area of work.
Oh, excuse me, sir. I am out of Manhattan, Kansas, correct.
And obviously with your many certifications, qualifications, you're a qualified inspector. Are you troubled by people in your industry who are not as capable as competitors?
Representative Miller, I believe that's a common standard across all industries, that there's always going to be a bottom of the barrel, and there's always going to be the ones that you prefer not to be in your profession. So I think that's just standard across the board.
And is the industry such that that's a self-correcting problem? In other words, if you're not good at it, you don't last?
I think, again, I hold this wholeheartedly, that I think in any industry, if you find out to be the bad apple, word gets around fast, especially as Mr. Toom says, with somebody dealing with their most expensive purchase in most people's lifetime. So again, are you going to take that chance with somebody who may be questionable, or you get a consensus of somebody that you're going to find reputable in your market?
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, it looks like you got off easy, sir. We only one question, so thank you for your testimony.
Yes, thank you. And if for the record, I would have somebody look at that radiator back there. It looks like it's about to go out. So.
Yeah, you might want to sit on the other side of the room when you sit down. Next up, we have Ralph Pimentel, President of the National Building Consultants. And Ralph, in looking at some of your testimony, there were some questions about mentioning names and minutes and things like that. And so if you would try to refrain from mentioning individual names in the public, that would be beneficial.
Yeah, that's no problem. Cindy talked to me earlier and agreed not to mention any specific names. My name is Ralph Pimentel. I'm the owner, president of National Building Consultants. I incorporated the business in 1988. And at that time, home inspections as part of a real estate transaction were rare. 99% of the agents, real estate agents and homeowners, hadn't heard of a whole house inspection. So I was one of the first to develop comprehensive inspection reports. And now today, probably 95% of all real estate contracts include a home inspection. So the industry has become popular and is now a mainstay in the real estate industry. Before starting this company, I was a certified building official with the cities of Topeka and the city of Lawrence. So I've had a chance to see firsthand the positive impact of regulations and building codes. And I do support regulations that ensure safe, reliable, sustainable housing. I was also a member of the Kansas Home Registration Board when the law was first adopted in 2008. And I also served as the last chairman of that board. So I have a chance to give you information on how this law performed in the public, in real life, and also give you some perspective on some troubling aspects of this proposed bill, H-Bill 2526. As I mentioned, in 2008, this bill was adopted. A board was named to oversee the activities of the home inspection industry. But in 2013, as previously mentioned, Governor Brownback decided to allow this law to sunset. And he did so for three specific reasons, and he stated that in his statement. He said, first of all, he believed in less government and less government intrusion into small business. He also noted that homeowners, even without a registration act for home inspectors, they did have avenues of recourse if they felt that they had received an unacceptable or an inferior inspection. They had the Attorney General's office, and there were civil courts that they could pursue their claims in. And lastly, but probably most notably for me, he said he allowed that law to sunset because the board had proven that it was incapable of regulating itself. And that was a specific reference to one individual who served on that board. Now, it's rare that this legislature has a chance to see how a law is going to impact the community before it's adopted. But because we had this law from 2008 to 2013, I can tell you the shortcomings as well as the benefits. But probably more important are going to be the shortcomings, because those shortcomings, those flaws that prompted the governor to allow the law to sunset are still in this bill. And probably the first one that comes to my attention is the exemption for engineers and architects. Basically, you're saying that home buyers who hire an architect or an engineer to do their home inspection is not going to be afforded the consumer protection that everybody wants to see. And there's been some claims that engineers and architects are overseen by the Board of Technical Professions, and they have equal oversight, if not greater. That's not true. And if you take a look at my testimony, it's going to refer to a letter from the Kansas Board of Technical Professions. And the most defining statement in this letter comes from the executive director, and she says, in the opinion of the board, therefore, the types of services described in your letter do not fall within the jurisdiction of the state of Kansas Technical Professions Board. So you're exempting engineers and architects and basically allowing them to perform home inspections and also not providing any consumer protection for homeowners. There's also the claim that an aggrieved homeowner could file a complaint with the board and possibly receive compensation that's even greater than what you see in this bill. That is also not true. If you read the statute for engineers and architects, there's not even a complaint process to address home inspections. The Board of Technical Professions in no way regulates engineers and architects who perform home inspections. And the reason is this. When you take a look at what an architect or an engineer can do, there's one huge exemption in that license. It says it does not apply to 1- and 2-family dwellings. So the first thing, and one of the reasons why the Senate Commerce Committee did not really see any need to move forward on this bill, there were several senators who came out and said, we want a bill that's going to cover everyone performing a home inspection, no exceptions. Another reason why this bill is troubling to me, and Representative Sutton, I think you hit the nail on the head. You referred to the non-delegation clause, which is part of our state constitution. And it says that the legislature cannot delegate its authority to an outside trade organization, and that's what this bill does. This bill says pre-inspector education, continuing education, is going to be approved by these trade associations. That's not allowed. And the Attorney General provided an opinion to the first board. And in that opinion, which is included in my written testimony, the Attorney General, Derek Schmidt, said, your board can't do this. If there are education providers, they have to be approved individually by the board, and they also have to be approved by the Board of Regents. They have to be approved as secondary education providers, approved by the U.S. Department of Education. And once again, you're seeing whoever wrote this bill trying to circumvent the Constitution or insert unconstitutional provisions. And just like the Senate Commerce Committee, I can't believe anyone would want to see that in any proposed legislation. I think it's also important that any proposed bill to regulate home inspectors include passing a KBI background check, not just to have an individual state whether he's been convicted of a felony in the last 5 years, but convicted of a felony ever and what type of felony. I think it's important for homeowners to be assured that they do not have criminals, people with criminal past, allowed 3 or 4 hours of access, unvetted access to their homes and to their families. And I also believe that the requirement for errors and omission insurance, surety bonds, fiscal responsibility be applied to everyone who's performing a home inspector with no exceptions. In closing, as I mentioned earlier, I do support regulation, and I've seen firsthand the benefits of regulation. But I also think there are better ways to establish consumer protection for the home inspection industry and provide better protection for home buyers. In closing, I do want to thank the House Commerce Committee for taking the time to listen to my testimony, and also for the time and effort that you've made in trying to improve the home inspection industry and trying to improve consumer protection. Although I'm not in favor of this bill, I've spoken with Mark, and I've offered to help put together a clean bill that provides, I think, comprehensive consumer protection and also a comprehensive form of home inspections. And I'd welcome any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Representative Clayton has a question, but before that, to our attorneys that are on the committee, would either of you want to weigh in on the constitutionality of the section of the bill that he pointed out? Representative Ralph?
My con law class was about 8 o'clock in the morning every day, and so that's not going to be one of my depths.
Well, I appreciate the honesty, sir. Representative Clayton?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Couple of questions that I have here, and thank you for your testimony, sir. You mentioned, and a number of us were here in the legislature when that sunset did occur. That was my first year, and so I remember some of the discussion that surrounded it. Can you tell me how home inspection businesses have grown as a result of this? So I think you spoke a little bit about the pro-business aspect, and so I want to know, has this actually provided any measurable financial benefit for these small business owners? Or is this speculation?
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. In regards to how it impacted the industry, before we had the first Home Inspector Registration Act, there were approximately 400 individuals and companies that provided real estate inspections. After the act was adopted in 2008, that number dwindled to about 250. So we lost a substantial number of individuals once regulation came into effect. During those 5 years that we had the registration board, we did have a few new entries, and I don't know of any positive or negative effect that the statute had on those new entrants, because most individuals who are going to enter the industry typically will go through training courses similar to the ones that were required between 2008 and 2013.
Okay, so we don't know how many new we've had since 2013, since that sunsetted?
No, I don't have any count of that.
All right, noted. One other thing, just a point that I wanted to raise here, there are a number of professions that require continuing education. I asked one of my attorney friends here on this committee about CLE, so continuing legal education. Now granted, he informed me that the Supreme Court sort of oversees that, but it's fairly normal for lots of continuing education to take place. This also takes place in my husband's industry, which is IT. And so I just want to kind of give pause to this because we require a lot of continuing education for our teachers and a lot of other things, and just I'm not entirely sure if we will work this bill, but I do stand in strong support of it because I tend to come down on the side of consumer protection, in particular when it is in regards to homes. So, Mr. Chair, just signaling my support of this. And sir, I do thank you for your testimony.
And just to clear up any misconception you might have had about my testimony, I too support continuing education. The problem is, in the past statute that created the Home Inspection Registration Act, continuing education could not be approved on a blanket basis by just saying, if this trade association or this trade association offers continuing education, then we'll accept it. The Attorney General, or in this case it was Assistant Attorney General Camille Noe, she said you can't have that blanket approval. The board has to take a look at each of these education classes and determine if they are appropriate. And that was also seconded by the Board of Regents. They said, you know, we have requirements for post-secondary education providers. We did approve continuing education, but we had to go through the correct process. And this bill doesn't go through that correct process.
Well, thank you. I see Attorney General staff here. I will not call them forward, but I probably will catch you for some questions to clarify that afterwards. So thank you. Appreciate that.
Representative Shu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your testimony. This is more, I think, me speaking out loud or thinking out loud than a real question. But it seems like most of the testimony thus far, and I know we probably have a couple more, is agreed that there can and should be some sort of minimum standards, and maybe this bill is not exactly the right avenue for that, or without some amendments. I think what would be helpful to me, and maybe this is a question for the research staff, is kind of laying out what the standards are right now, what home inspectors are liable for now, laying out how that changes, in a chart maybe with this bill, and then we can keep working together to kind of figure out the best avenue forward for this, because like the previous representative says, I think homeowners or potential homeowners do deserve a certain level of base level of confidence in their home inspector, but without being overly burdensome. I think there's a way to do that, whether or not this bill is the right avenue forward. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no further questions for you, sir. Thank you for your testimony today. And we'll wrap up with Neil Pinnock, who you have listed as neutral, but is an opponent. Neil, are you with us today? Okay. So we'll get you that testimony in your email, and it'll be in the S drive. And we do have a couple of, we have several written opponents and a couple of written proponents that I mentioned before. With that, there's no further testimony on this bill, and I'll close the bill hearing. Next week, we have a few bills that were assigned to us this week. Look for your email, but we will be hearing a few bills. We'll hear one Monday and Tuesday if they come back to the Commerce. We've turned them in, so we'll see what happens. So look for that, and I appreciate you guys, all your work on all this stuff this week. With that, we're adjourned.